Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Legal Helm, where we dive into the latest trends, challenges, and innovations in the legal technology space. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Dean Jeanne Eicks, Associate Dean of Graduate Programs at the Colleges of Law. Dean Eicks is an expert at the intersection of law and technology, bringing a unique perspective from her experience as both a CIO and a law professor. At the Colleges of Law, she develops curriculum and prepares students to drive meaningful change in the access to justice. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the evolving legal framework surrounding AI regulations and also how technology is transforming legal education. Dean Eicks, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you've had a pretty interesting and dynamic career in law and legal technology. What inspired you to get into academia and to your current role as dean?
It was inspiring as a kind word. Let's say it was winding and meandering. When I was in law school in my second year, I received my moot court brief back, and I was marked way down because I didn't blue book correctly. Now, my argument was sound. All of the other pieces were sound, but I didn't blue book right. And I came from a family of engineers, and I said, oh, my Lord, I have to write a Perl script for this to fix it because I can't be marked down because I didn't get the period in the right place. So I used regular expressions to create blue booking for my legal briefs because that's what we did in the mid-90s. So at that point, I started a little .com startup in my second year of law school because that's what everyone does, right? And from there, I ended up, after I graduated law school, as a computer science professor with a new business. And my alma mater called me to come back and be their first CIO, acknowledging that technology had a strategic role in law schools. And from there, I transitioned into providing a legal technology type of curriculum for Vermont Law and Graduate School. And my academic dean then hired me away to colleges of law and says, you know what, you had great ideas for master's programs and LLMs. Let's get those started at the colleges of law.
Amazing. You've just given me flashbacks when you mentioned Perl scripting. I think one of the first jobs that I had out of university was building a Perl script for the electricity and energy sector over here in the UK. And it was pretty challenging. So that's probably why I'm not a programmer today.
You know what? It was more challenging to see myself marked down to a C on a brief that would have, quoting the professor, otherwise deserved an A if I had managed to get my blue booking correctly.
We live and learn. So legal education is undergoing a big transformation at the moment, right? And I'm interested to hear what changes you believe are most essential to better prepare law students for the realities of what the modern legal practice will look like.
There's two or three paths here, right? There's the notion that innovation and just basic business has to be brought into legal practice, and sound business practices like project management that was absent from the legal field for a long time, and businesses were doing it well and re-engineering processes, in the 90s and the 80s. And here we were, when I started teaching these courses in 2010 and earlier, with no idea that there was any role for project management or process reengineering or any of those things in the law. And then when we start thinking about reengineering legal processes and removing steps and making it more efficient, technology has just a built-in place in that creation of efficiency. So serving your clients better now and today is about having technology. I'm not saying anyone that's listening to this podcast doesn't already know, right? I'm speaking the truth as it is from my perspective. So as we think about these things, we have to think about how to educate our students both about the rule of law, but the practicalities of legal practice. And that includes things like just matter management and how to do it well and how to use those tools, and implementing them as a key portion and a foundation of the classroom experience. So other schools might use online tools like Canvas or something like that, when you can use a matter management tool to lead students through the coursework and use like a Clio or something else that's accessible and easy and where the vendor is willing to work with the schools to make it freely available. You get the students adjusted to managing their workflow and keeping track of their time and using technology tools in that way, just as a baseline foundational underpinning of practice. So that is at the most basic level. That's at the what I would almost call clerical level. And then you start thinking about, okay, how can we be smarter lawyers? How can we teach students law better, faster, smarter, cheaper, all of those things, right? And one of those ways is technology is oftentimes a rule driven system. And when we think about things that are rule driven, the law is naturally aligned with that kind of thinking. And so when we teach students how to use rule driven tools, whether it's a Zapier using basic automation, or it's using something like Community Lawyer was for a long time in the US, where we were teaching them how to build drag and drop legal apps. And now we're using AI based tools, but we're teaching them how to apply the rules of law in a technical space. And I think that's where we're going to end up.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting to hear that. How do you see the role of a lawyer changing over the next decade with all of that kind of technology exposure that you talk of and the innovation that's happening in the sector at the moment? What does that mean to a person studying the law?
There's my hopes and then there's my fears, right? So my greatest hope is that this is the great equalizer for access to justice and access to law and legal services. My fear is that, of course, it becomes something that the elite can afford. So where we end up depends on the democratization of some of this technology and how we're making it freely available or not, as the case may be. And then how we are adapting to using that law in practice. So if the law is doing the stuff that used to be filling in the forms and doing the mundane, and lawyers become the advisors, we're counselors. That's what law is, right? We're supposed to be providing counsel. I think the role of the lawyer becomes more counselor, becomes a more arguably humane and humanitarianly driven practice. Is that really the way it's going to shake out? I don't have my crystal ball out today. I can't tell you for sure. I'd like to think that it gives us more opportunity to work with clients one-on-one and less requirements and less fees related to the paperwork and the amount of writing that's required to do something that looks very similar to the last one, just like that we did, right? There should be ways to use rules and use AI to shift those clauses so they address the needs of a particular client and moves us into a different way of providing legal advice. And that's how I see it. I also see a place for AI providing direct legal advice for simple things. I really do. And there's a blending there of government automation and what lawyers are sometimes called on to do for people, whether that in the US is Social Security and, filing for that or filing appeals or things of that nature. That's something that potentially could be directly to the consumer instead of having a lawyer in that step. So that would remove legal jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on something very interesting there, which is the cost of providing the legal service to a customer will most likely fundamentally change, right, over the coming months and years with all of this technology in mind. What does that do in terms of how you prepare for just understanding pricing models when it comes to the education at a younger age, right? Because I think the thing I've noticed, particularly with some of the more seasoned lawyers that might be out in the industry today, there was a time when I would speak to them and we would be building things like financial dashboards to tell them how they're doing from a financial perspective for a particular client, and be able to have all these amazing, drill downs to get down to the nuts and bolts of how things are priced. But actually, like a lot of the times, the adoption rate of any lawyer using that technology was really, really low. Like literally, you would probably get like 10% adoption across the firm for accessing these dashboards, which are giving them some good information. And I remember talking to one of the managing partners, and the response I got was, I don't really care about the numbers. I'm here to practice law, and that's what I want to do. If my finance team tell me there's a problem, then I'll deal with the problem, right? But actually, I really want to just focus on practicing law and working with my clients. Two things would be really interesting to understand from your perspective is, has that changed and how has that changed? And how do you think it will look in the future in terms of how you prepare students for the future of how pricing might be different?
I actually have a course right now that I'm in the midst of teaching, where one whole unit is about fixed pricing, scope of work, proposals as a law firm, and how to write a proposal, how to predict the time it's going to take to do something so you can give a fixed price or a within 10% kind of price, what that looks like. And in the US, right, our model rules of professional responsibility sitting out there, depending on the state you're in, have some limitations or have newly related changes like limited scope practice and things of that nature. And so helping people think of what they do as lawyers differently. The whole idea of bringing in, particularly for folks that practice law for years, of not taking a matter from start to finish is new. I said, think about handing it off to other associates who do really well in your firm. Now, instead, imagine you are on your own doing that and you have created a network through which you can hand off the other portions of a matter. And the consumer becomes the general contractor instead of the law firm, right? And so lots of different business models and teaching students to think about how they give services in a different way and bringing them in early on. And the idea that we don't in law school teach students about rainmaking and what that looks like. And that's an old term for just doing business, right? Which is what other business owners do. So how do we bring new clients in? How do we connect those clients to a revenue stream? How do we decide some clients, some businesses will not do hourly rates anymore? They won't do retainer. They want a scope of work, a fixed bid, and that's it. So it's a whole new way of thinking. And these law students don't necessarily have mentors in the field. In some ways, they're doing some reverse mentoring when they get out of law school and helping the practice change how they think about providing legal services, billing, and being part of that sort of, you've got to pay attention to the revenue, where's the money coming from, thinking, which is different, right? It's a new way of practicing law. You can't divorce the business side from being a lawyer. It would be nice, right? It would be lovely, but it's not real. I'll use a school metaphor. We used to go in and become academics, and we taught in our specific area of interest. I don't know an academic now that doesn't participate in some way in student recruiting, right? Because that's part of a holistic approach to any business that you're in.
Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about the subject of the year and the last couple of years, which is AI. So AI is moving faster than most regulatory frameworks. How do you think legal education and policy can keep up with that pace of innovation?
Legal education is, and education broadly, is at a crossroads here. Because the last study I saw on this, it came out looking at students who use AI versus students who don't use AI and how it impacts their analytical capacity. And the notion that students who use AI don't have the same analytical capacity as students who use AI. And so how do we ensure that students don't use AI, or is that even the right path? We're in the process at the colleges of law really thinking about how we implement our internal policies so that our students are both taught how to use AI responsibly, and then how we overcome the analytical deficit and arguably the plagiarism deficit, right? How do we ensure that they're thinking for themselves, right? The courts are encountering this. The courts are now having to double check everything that they wouldn't have necessarily checked before because they fear that AI has hallucinated a case, and this brief is counting on a hallucinated case. So you've got court clerks that are sensitive to this. And oftentimes these judges are teaching in our classrooms and they hate it. And so how do you bridge the gap between sort of legal field that really is against AI, businesses and clients who are demanding the use of AI because they know it can reduce their legal spend so much, right? So how do we prepare students for this world of dichotomies, right, in the approach to AI? And for better or worse, our approach has been to say, use AI and show me exactly what you do. And then teach them to put their analysis in prompt writing as much as in what is extracted from the tool. And so it's like a hammer, right? You use a hammer for a nail, you don't use it for a screw. How do we teach students when to use AI and how to use it wisely? And then how do we write a policy that allows faculty the flexibility of using AI when it's appropriate, yet forces students to really demonstrate their knowledge when it comes to an exam or something of that nature? It's a difficult conversation to have at this point. And there are so many different viewpoints.
Indeed, indeed. I think it's quite interesting because as you see people coming out of education now and prepared for the technology piece of it, we're also dealing with the fact that some law firms are still very traditionally focused on the billable hour and a little reluctant to change in technology. Are you seeing any of that element in terms of like now you've got a student coming out that's really hungry to be able to use their skills, and then they get put into a situation where actually they're not actually getting to leverage some of those cool things that you're teaching around prompt engineering and other things that could actually enable them to be more efficient?
When I was at Stanford's Future Law a year ago, because we're coming up on the next one next week, I was talking to managing partners and firms specifically about the question you're asking me. I'm like, so we're preparing these students, but we send them to you and they come back to us and they say, all of that stuff you taught us is completely useless. And we're lucky we're not using typewriters. And that's what I hear back from our recent alums sometimes. And she said, it's the clients. The clients are going to pressure us to use the tech, and we're going to have those associates in place who know the tech and can use AI and can implement it, because we're not going to have a choice. And I heard that from several managing partners. So I think maybe change is slow to come, but I think there's going to be economic factors that force firms to adapt to technology, particularly AI, because it's become so buzzy. The consumers want it. The consumers want to know why the lawyers aren't using it. Why did this take you 2 hours when I asked ChatGPT and it gave me the same answer as you did and it took 30 seconds?
Yeah, yeah, very true, very true. So sticking with the theme of AI, what do you see as the biggest legal and ethical challenges from AI adoption in the legal field?
Hey John, how do I find out what we've invoiced my client?
How can I view my outstanding WIP?
How do I submit my expenses again?
Do we have next Monday off?
Monday off?
It's exciting to have fresh faces at your law firm, but onboarding them takes a lot of time and a lot of energy when everyone is remote. You're busy enough as it is. Helm 360 has the solution. Just ask Termi, Helm 360's next-level chatbot solution for knowledge management. Termi can answer many of your new hires' questions for you without distracting you or anyone else at the firm. This means fewer frantic emails, fewer help desk tickets, more time and more focused productivity for everyone at the firm. Working with Termi, you can have those eager new employees up to speed in a snap. They may never need to ask you a question again. Check out helm360.com/Termi to see Termi in action and find out how it can make onboarding new hires as easy as sending an email.
Obviously, hallucinations, which is becoming less and less of a problem as the systems grow and become more accurate, right? So there's that, depending on something that's not accurate. Much like the sort of adoption slope we saw in e-discovery and using tools in e-discovery, I think we're going to see something similar here in AI, where people are going to start worrying less about it being wrong because it's wrong less frequently than the human beings. And in those situations, I think our next challenge becomes, what is the unauthorized practice of law? What is legal practice, the legal guild? Where is it going to go after this? And I don't know. I don't know. I think it's going to be torn down in some ways. I don't know how it can't be, but there's the other Silicon Valley phrase, move fast and break things. We need to be careful we're not breaking anything that we can't fix, right? And so lawyers we're risk-averse people. We move slowly. And so because of that risk aversion, I think our adoption of technology is going to be, well, at least we're going to try to do it with eyes wide open. I don't know that we'll always succeed, because I don't know that you can always predict what's going to happen with AI. The folks that I spoke to, I go to a lot of legal tech conferences. We all see the same people at these conferences. It's the same faces. When you've been doing it for a decade, they're all your buddies when you go. And they all say the same thing. They say, we can't predict, AI's not there yet. So 3 years ago, they were saying AI's not there. It's going to be 10 years before the AI can pass the bar exam. 3 months later, it did. And that's how fast we're moving. And so when you're moving that quickly, how do you really get a handle on what guardrails you need to have in place? And with government fluctuations right now, it's really hard to get a legislative baseline. So it's going to be on organizations that provide standards information, I think, to do some of that, instead of public ordering, more of a private ordering around AI and setting those limitations. Right now, there doesn't seem to be guardrails, and that makes me very nervous. I see a time in the not very distant future, and it's probably happening already, where much like doctors really hate to hear from WebMD when the patient comes into the treatment room, right? I think there's going to be a lot of lawyers that really hate to hear about what AI said and hate to be told that they're wrong because of AI. So how do we regulate that? The little line at the bottom of the ChatGPT response that says you really should seek a lawyer for legal advice is not enough. Clearly, people are acting on what came before. What kind of guardrails do we need? Can we tell AI, no, you can't? I think that horse is out of the barn. I think it's too late. I don't think we can recapture that. So where do we go next? I looked to the EU to make the inroads here because the system is more functional for creating that kind of forward-thinking legislation at the moment. And much like we saw with the GDPR and thinking about privacy law, we're going to see that for AI in the EU as well, and already have, right?
Yeah, they definitely seem to be pushing forward fast. So hopefully that will help to give the guidelines that are needed. Do you think that we are doing enough to prepare future lawyers for some of these AI-related issues? Like you touched on data privacy being a big one. There's the bias and just the whole liability for, making autonomous decisions and not checking them.
Right. So trust but verify. I mean, it's not that we didn't teach these things in law school before. It's not that we didn't teach people to always check the work of their associates, right? Or people who hand you something. If you have a paralegal working for you, you're responsible for what goes out under your signature. There are rules that actually cover the changes in AI within the model rules of professional responsibility. It's making sure people understand, because this is a slightly different setting, how to apply those rules within this setting and making sure that they understand that means that you can't trust it just because it's a computer. Just because the AI said so doesn't make it right. You have to read it. Does that make sense? Is that a good argument? It's a tool, not a solution, right? And there's a difference. We use a tool to do a specific portion of something, but then we go back and check it. We tweak it. We make it ours, right? So I think there's some of that, teaching students how to use prompt writing. And I know prompt engineering is vogue right now, whatever we decide to call it. It's about, much like you had to learn to search well and using Lexis or Westlaw, you've got to learn how to write the prompt well. And so it's teaching them how to do that. But then we have the additional obligation of teaching them how to look under the hood and think about algorithms in such a way that they can combat bias, that they recognize civil rights violations as they occur within AI. And all of those pieces become, we're offering at the Colleges of Law data science in the law course right now. Sarah Sutherland is teaching that for us. She wrote a book on data science in legal practice. And it's a really wonderful take on how to stop and think about how data is used and how AI is used and how it can be beneficial to the profession, but also all of the hidden gotchas, right? And so teaching those really important bias problems within the legal curriculum has now become something you have to do. And we can't just stick our head in the sand. It's here, it's happening. We have to move forward. And we have to prepare our students the best way possible for those changes.
And what are some of the things that you do to encourage students in your space to be able to engage with the emerging technologies that apply to them in the future? And maybe like some of them come in with a vision of what studying law actually is and maybe a traditional sense, right? But how do you get them excited about that stuff? Are there things that you do to get them engaged?
We taught a recent weekend course, and it was, they had a 2-week lead up online and then a weekend intensive where they actually wrote AI applications. Most of the law students did it to help them practice and study for the bar exam. They fed it the information from their notes, from their study guides, and they used it to create basically an AI tutor for themselves for the bar exam. You want to get law students excited, help them create tools that help them pass the bar exam. I mean, they walked out of there very excited. Now, that's not to say we didn't have some that came in and said, oh, I can use this in my work. We had an HR professional, and he put all of the HR manuals for his very large company into the large language model, and he had it use all of those documents to answer HR-based questions within his organization. And so there was a way in which the employee was doing the first step of that compliance policy work that HR used to do. And so he was very excited about how much better that made his life and how much better he could serve the employees, because within his organization, they speak over 200 languages. And so the AI could translate all of these answers from these policy manuals for the individuals that were asking the questions. So it made him excited because he could apply it directly to something he was doing in his career. And so at colleges of law, we're doing some things where we have non-traditional students here. And that means they're already out in the work world doing things. And so they can automatically see how to leverage these technologies in a very law-forward way. So it's a smart wedding, and I don't fight a lot of the traditional pieces until they come back to me and say, this firm is not ready to move forward. What do I do, Dean Eicks? I say,
Okay.
keep going, right? Change is hard. And you have to be there to both facilitate change and step up when somebody says, our client is asking us to do this. No one here knows how. Does anyone know how? And then when they ask that question, you can raise your hand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting to kind of hear some of the technologies and the software businesses that are out there now creating solutions for various elements of the workflow of a lawyer. I was talking to a company recently who's doing a lot of stuff around predictive outcomes of cases, for example, where they'll grab all of the data for a court, consume it, and then come up with a prediction of whether or not you're going to be successful or not, and even help you put your arguments together. I'm thinking that there's an element of additional, I guess, pressure, mental health concern, right, that needs to be balanced out here as well, because I'm just thinking the amount of pressure that is on a lawyer anyway, having to deal with some of the cases that they have to deal with, and then combined with the fact that actually there's almost like an element of competition in the room in terms of some of the technology, even though it's there to enhance what they do. How much do you focus on that element of it in terms of how do you actually navigate as a lawyer the kind of things that you're going to be dealing with from an emotional perspective, workload balance perspective? Because I imagine that this has always been the case when you move from education into practice. There's a lot of pressures you have to deal with anyway, right, in terms of case volume and all the rest of it. Are there things that you do to prepare a lawyer for that part of the journey beyond the technology and the physical practice of law?
In some ways, compartmentalization is a useful tool. So that's part of that project management that we teach. We actually have a project management course, and we try to teach them how to manage those loads, because with good organization and good time management, it reduces the stress, right? It's not going to do away with it because, as you say, a lot of what lawyers do is weighty, right? It's emotionally weighty matters. And it's not going to do away with volume. But the tech can help reduce the volume and reduce some of the demands and make you work more efficiently. It's a lens, right? How do you choose to view the tech? You can view it as competitive, or you can view it as assistive. And as long as you're perceiving it as assistive, you're going to try to leverage it to make your life better and not fight it. I think that fighting it creates even more stress and makes it a downhill spiral. And some of that's about change management, right? Good change management and in a firm is going to help you implement that technology in a positive way and in a life positive way for the attorney, and not in a competitive way. That overlooks the difficulties for folks that aren't digital natives. I talk to a lot of lawyers that say, I just wanted to retire before this happened. I'm so sorry I didn't. So that's hard too. I think you have some really good questions. And going back to your earlier point that you made about the company that's actually going to be able to predict trial outcomes, right? That's an ethics question I give my students on a final exam, actually. And the ethics question is, are they obligated once they get that information to share it with the client? Why or why not? Do you have to say, yes, you can choose to sue, but you have a 15% chance of success? I'm a great lawyer and I can maybe raise that to 20, but it's still a 20%. What is truth, right? And it becomes very challenging to decide that, because if we know that some of this data is biased, if we know that some of these algorithms are not necessarily processing a low-income case in the same way that they would process an upper income individual case, does that mean that we have an obligation to say you're always going to lose because you're low income and you can't afford the kind of legal services? I mean, this is possibly going to create some transparency that lawyers are going to find it very difficult to cope with. And we talk about it because I think the only thing you can do to protect and provide knowledge to those students that they can use going into the field is to talk about it in advance. We can't predict for sure what they're going to encounter. What we can do is say, here's the possibilities, and here are different pathways you can follow in these possibilities. We don't have answers because no one does, because it's all new.
Yes, indeed. I mean, if nothing else, it's going to be an interesting few years ahead as some of this stuff unravels, and in some ways exciting, right?
It is. I love being at this forefront because I'm a true believer in so many ways that technology is going to create efficiency, is going to open the doors to access to legal service, and is really going to make the law more available to everyone. And I think for legal professionals, it's going to shift our jobs into the jobs of counselor more, an advisor. And I don't know about you, but the first time I filled in one of those long court forms, I thought to myself, gosh, that's not what I signed up for. But when I'm sitting with clients and I'm talking to them about their new business and the best way to structure it and what makes most sense for them, and I'm thinking about all the chess pieces, that's what I signed up for. And if AI enables that, then we've really got something that will help the lawyers and help the client.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. So looking ahead, what's your vision for the law school of the future?
Oh, that's a great question. So much of that depends on what we do with the legal profession in the States, right? We do not have tiered levels of services in most states. And having those tiered levels of services would change what a law school looks like, right? And we would have to address education at the differing levels of service. I think the tiered levels of service are going to happen because of AI. And so what does the law school of the future look like? It looks like an institution where perhaps you don't have to have a JD to do some aspect of practice. And that's, you know, I'm sure my colleagues are out there just cringing to hear anyone say that. But I think there are certain types of law that probably don't require that level of preparation. And if folks are just locked into doing those particular types of law, the medical profession already has this, right? Why isn't legal doing that in the States? There are many reasons, right? The least of which is the control of the profession over how the profession interacts with the public.
Indeed. Really, really interesting stuff. So I just want to move to some wrap-up questions, if I may. The first of which being, which I ask all my guests, is if you could borrow Doctor Who's time machine and go back to yourself at 18 years old, what advice would you give yourself?
Learn to code formally instead of informally. I taught myself to code. Was a great time when we were developing all kinds of interesting things. And, you know, I would be at Dartmouth and potentially instead of WashU, please don't hate me for that, WashU, but Dartmouth was doing so many cool things around AI at that time. And I would have loved to have been on the cutting edge of what that was. It was philosophical in the early 90s, but it was there.
Excellent. I can actually relate to that as well because I'm a self-taught Infomix 4GL developer back in the day, and this was when we used to have like physical books on a bookshelf. So it was just when I needed to code, I'll just have a quick look, see how I do something, and I'll figure it out from there. But never actually took the time to sit down in class and actually learn it properly. And I wish I had, because it would have made it much more easier and efficient to be able to do it that way.
When you're self-taught, there's potholes along the way. And you really wish somebody could have pointed that out before you fell into it. And I think that's what a formal education does. It says, here's the playing field, so you can know where to go. And I didn't have that. It was good. You know, the Perl script did Blue Book citations. I was happy, but I struggled. And I wouldn't have that if I could tell myself to do it differently.
Yeah, indeed. And if you could have dinner with any famous person, non-famous person, past or present, who would it be and why?
Mark Twain. Absolutely Mark Twain. His sense of humor, I would love to laugh that much over the course of a meal. And wise, right? Just wise in a way that I don't know that we have today in our writers. And so I would love to have a conversation with Mark
Twain. I love it. Proper belly laughs.
It's always good. And I think as I get older, I value laughter more and more.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And finally, any closing thoughts or advice that would benefit the legal professionals in our audience?
It's not going to go away. Technology is here, and you have to find a way to make it a partner to what you do instead of an opponent in what you do.
Brilliant. Dean Eicks, it's been fantastic and really insightful speaking to you today. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me.
Thank you so much for having me. And your questions are so insightful. So thank you again for the great interview.
Wonderful. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Legal Helm. Thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us out.